years now. So I am a great resource for everybody going forward in terms of, implementing TurningPoint and, different ways you can use it, different types of questions you can ask with it, and that sort of thing. So I've got all my contact information on this initial slide here today, and feel free to jot it down. I've also got it on the slide at the end of the presentation, and then I'll be sending out all this information to you guys either at the end of the day today or first thing tomorrow morning, just depending on how long it takes my webinar recording and stuff to process. So today, really what we're going to be doing is really covering the basics of TurningPoint. The intention of the session today is really a new user introduction. So the very basics, right from the beginning, downloading TurningPoint, down to, saving your data and some very basic reporting options. And we'll just have a look at really building kind of a very basic polling slide. So we're not going to get into too much detail today. We do have a couple other webinars scheduled for next week that go into some of the additional topics, some of the more advanced features like demographic tracking, priority ranking, and things like that. We also have a webinar coming up next week on our Anywhere polling option as well as our self-paced polling option. So if you haven't signed up for those, feel free to do so, and it'd be great to have you guys on those calls as well. So I'm going to start out just by kind of going over downloading the TurningPoint software itself. A lot of people don't necessarily know, and this seems to come mostly from an IT perspective. When you go and say, hey, can you install TurningPoint on my computer for me? Generally the question you get back is, okay, well, how much does the software license cost? The actual TurningPoint software itself is completely free from our website. So you can just go to turningtechnologies.ca and download a copy of it, and there's no cost for that. So you can actually have it on as many computers as you want. You can have it on your computer at home if you need to work on something there. You can also have it on your computer at the office. So, as far as installing it, you don't have to worry about too much there. When it comes to acquiring a copy of TurningPoint from our website, there are a couple different versions of it, and I'll just kind of outline the differences between the two. When you go to our website, there is a no install version of TurningPoint and an install version. The difference between those two things, the no install version will actually run directly from a USB flash drive or directly from a folder on your desktop. Okay, so if you work for an organization where you need to have somebody from IT come and install applications on your computer because you don't have administrative rights, the install version of TurningPoint will require you to go through that process, whereas the no install version doesn't. So I always recommend, keeping the no install version handy, in a folder on your desktop, on a flash drive or whatever. So if you ever find yourself, in one of those situations where, geez, I need to use TurningPoint tomorrow, but IT can't install the software for me on this system until next week, the no install version is kind of a great way around that. There's also a Mac version that you'll see on our website. TurningPoint 5 is Mac compatible, and you can also move back and forth from one version to the other. So if you build something on Mac, you can move it over to PC and vice versa. The functionality, the Mac version doesn't have everything the PC version has, but look and feel and function-wise, it's pretty similar. So that's kind of downloading TurningPoint in a nutshell. And by the way, I didn't mention at the very beginning, but you should see on the side of your presentation window like a little panel with a chat window and a QA window. As we go along today, feel free to kind of fire questions into there, and I'll kind of stop periodically and have a look at the questions that are in there and answer them as we go. And realistically, we'll probably finish up a little bit early, and so that'll give me some time to go over some of those questions as well. Okay, so with the downloading of TurningPoint out of the way, sort of the next step along is your hardware setup. Now, your hardware can take on a few different, looks and shapes and forms. For the most part, it all sets up the same. Everything works the same way. So there isn't a whole lot that you need to worry about doing. The equipment is plug and play, so it's essentially just a matter of, plug everything in, hand keypads out, and go. So your system is basically made up of two components. There's your USB receiver, which is the two devices on the left there, the RF Plus and the RF. For those of you that are newer customers, you probably have one of these two receivers. If you have had equipment, or if your organization has had equipment for a few years, your receiver may look a little bit different. It might be like a beige or cream color, or it might be like a solid dark gray color. Those are the older receivers. They still work fine. They'll work with the current keypad models and stuff like that. So there's not a huge need to really upgrade them. The RF Plus receiver on the top here, it does also have 4 gigs of storage space built into it, so that's kind of a nice bonus. It makes it really easy to kind of, store your presentations, store your session data, and things like that. So from a presentation standpoint, all you basically need to do is just plug your receiver in, fire up TurningPoint, open your presentation, and go. So it's pretty user-friendly as far as that goes. The other component is the keypad itself. Now on the slide here, I've got the response card LCD, the NXT, and then the standard response card. So chances are you've got one of those 3 models of device. As far as setup goes, on a basic level, they're all pretty much the same. You literally just have to hand them out to your individual participants, and they're good to go. Okay, so unless you're doing things like tracking individual participants and creating things like participant lists and stuff like that, you just put the keypad in the hands of the participant and you're set. In one of the later webinars, we will get into creating participant lists and tracking. So if that's something you're interested in, again, feel free to sign up for that additional topics webinar for next week. Other than that, it's, again, just to hand the keypads out. The only thing you really need to worry about is making sure that your keypads are on the same channel as your receiver. Everything ships out of our office on channel 41, so you don't need to worry about activating anything, doing any sort of link-up procedures or anything like that. Okay. On the topic of the hardware, just before we kind of move on to sort of the next area, the response card LCD and the standard response card there on the bottom, those two use a CR2032 calculator style battery, so it's very similar to what your keyless entry in your car uses. The NXT uses 2 AAAs. Your average battery life is anywhere from 12 to 18 months. Okay, so you do have a fairly large range in terms of usage. Generally, what I recommend is, if you plan to replace your batteries, once every 12 months kind of thing, you're looking a couple bucks per keypad as far as ongoing maintenance. So it's a pretty low cost as far as maintaining this hardware. Okay. The technology is radio frequency, as most of you probably know, so you don't need to worry about line of sight. If the receiver is tucked under a presenting podium or something like that, or behind a desk, the signals will go through that desk or table or whatever it is. And basically, as long as you're within 200 feet of the receiver with your keypad, it's going to pick up your responses, no problem at all. If you're ever in a larger environment, we do have a long-range receiver available that'll double that 200-foot range up to 400 feet. Okay, so it's the hardware itself is extremely flexible in terms of usability and setup. Okay, what I'll also do, I mentioned it on this version of the webinar I did the other day. One of the resources I'll send out to everybody that was registered for the webinar, I'm going to send out a recording of this session, the presentation itself, as well as a PDF that outlines what we're going over today. But it also has, on the very first page, it's like a 10-step checklist of things to check off before you start a session. So, I mentioned you've got to make sure your receiver is plugged in, right? It's got, step 1, plug in your receiver. Step 2, launch TurningPoint. Step 3, hand your keypads out. So I'll share that with everybody as a resource as well, so that you've got quick and easy access to that too. Okay, so TurningPoint dashboard is what this screenshot here is showing us. You guys are probably, for the most part, familiar with this. Just to kind of recap it very quickly, this is always your starting point when you're starting out with TurningPoint. So whether you are getting ready to build a presentation or run a presentation with an audience, you always want to make sure you're starting with your TurningPoint dashboard. Otherwise, by default, TurningPoint will not load with PowerPoint. Okay, so it's a very important step. It does give you a key piece of information here. You'll see on my screenshot right now, it shows receiver and it says none found. When you have your receiver plugged in and everything's working properly the way it should, this little radio tower is going to light up and it'll show where mine says none found. It'll show the number of the channel that the receiver is currently set to. So I always recommend double checking that to make sure you remember to plug your receiver in. If it says none found and you kind of look around and say, oops, forgot to connect the receiver, it's literally just a matter of plug the receiver in, give the computer a couple of minutes to sort of recognize the fact that the receiver is now plugged in. You'll see it pop up and recognize it, and then from there you can hit your PowerPoint polling option. Okay. Now, one of the great things with TurningPoint is that it's the same version of TurningPoint regardless of the version of Windows and the version of Office that you're on. So TurningPoint will currently go as far back as Windows XP and Office XP, all the way up to the latest version of Office 2013 and Windows 8. Okay, so it's one single download across the board for everything. Okay, it looks the same, works the same, features are the same, and everything's compatible. Okay, so it's nice and easy that way. So what would happen is once you click your PowerPoint polling panel here, that's going to launch you into your PowerPoint application with TurningPoint loaded. And in a little bit, when I show you guys how to build a polling slide, we'll see exactly what that toolbar is going to look like. Okay, so let's look at how a question works. So we'll go over how you're going to poll a question during your presentation and sort of how it works. And then we'll kind of work backwards and go back a few steps, and I'll show you how I actually built it. I find that generally works a little bit better that way, and it's sort of a little easier for everybody to kind of follow along. So this is a polling slide. Everything in your presentation is going to work just as a standard PowerPoint presentation would. Okay, so you can advance all your slides just by using your standard presenter cue, your arrow keys, your space bar, you know, whatever it is you want to do. When you come to a polling slide, just like this one that I have here, the one thing you'll notice a little bit different is this little floating toolbar appears. And so that's kind of your visual cue to say, okay, well, this is a polling slide. You know, something else is going on right now. And so what TurningPoint's going to do is polling will open automatically. Okay, so TurningPoint's going to go out and start saying, okay, you know, audience can push buttons on their keypad. From the participant's perspective, all they need to do is literally pick up their keypad and push, you know, if my answer choice here was 1, I would push 1 on my keypad. The keypad wakes up for that sort of split second, sends the response, gets that confirmation back saying, okay, participant pushed a valid answer selection, and that's all it does, and it goes back to sleep. Okay. As your participants or audience members start to do that, your responses box here on the TurningPoint toolbar will start to count up. Okay, so whether you've got, you know, say a small group with 10 participants or a large group with, say, 3,000 participants, at a very quick glance, you can see exactly where you're sitting in terms of response count. Okay. A very common question that participants tend to have, and for any of you that may have used TurningPoint in sessions or sat through sessions where the presenter was using TurningPoint and you were answering questions, most of you have probably heard a participant say, well, can I change my mind? Right? Can I change my answer selection? And quite simply, yes, you can. So as long as the facilitator or presenter has polling open, the participant can change his or her mind as many times as they would like. So if I were to push 1 for Toronto, and then, maybe I chatted with my buddy beside me, or I thought about it and said, oh no, maybe, I think it might be Vancouver. All I've got to do is hit 4, and my answer choice now becomes Vancouver, okay? Whatever the last button was that I pushed when the presenter closed polling, that will become my answer, and that will be what Turning Point counts, okay? Turning Point will also not allow a participant to choose the same answer choice more than one time. So if I was sitting there and you said to me, what do you think of this idea? And I wanted to be the negative person in this room and say, okay, I don't think it's very good, and I just wanted to push that answer choice over and over and over and over. Turning Point only accepts it one time, okay? So you don't have to worry about your participants skewing data back and forth one way or the other. Now, when it comes to closing polling and displaying the results that you've collected, there are a few different ways to do that. The default way is a manual process, which is what we're going to be talking about today. The other sessions that I'll be doing next week go into some of the other ways that you can do it. So when we're talking about Turning Point, the easiest way to sort of think of it is to just think of the standard PowerPoint animation system. Okay, so when we've got a standard PowerPoint slide with a bunch of animations, let's say we've got 3 pictures set up to animate into the slide one after another. Generally, you set that up so that when you advance each time, that sort of triggers the next picture to animate in. Turning Point works the exact same way, and it actually operates based on the animation system in PowerPoint. So as the presenter or facilitator, when you are ready to close polling and look at the results, all you have to do is advance your slide one time. Okay, so whether that is your arrow key, mouse click, presenter cue, if you have one of our presenter cards, you can use that as well. Okay, as soon as you do that, what's going to happen is polling's going to close. Turning Point's going to kind of tabulate all the results and show the chart on the slide right away. Okay, so you can immediately see, what the audience thought the answer was. In this case, I can see that, only 27% of the audience actually got the question correct with the simulated polling that I'm doing right now. So I might want to say, okay, so why did 37% of you pick Ottawa? Right, and I can engage in that sort of discussion. Now, in this scenario, my question does have a correct answer associated with it. And so what I can actually do now is if I advance my slide a second time, that's actually going to display what the correct answer was. Okay, so that's something that I set up ahead of time, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that too. And so that's all you've got to do. Okay, now a question I get quite a bit is, well, do we have to have a question with a correct answer? And the answer is no, you don't. If you are just polling your audience and saying, what do you guys think of this? What's your opinion? What should our next step be? That sort of stuff. All you have to do is literally just build the question. You don't have to do anything as far as correct answers go. Okay, and I'm going to show you how exactly to do that right now. Okay, and so I'm just going to jump back out to edit mode here. So you'll see that this is just, for the most part, PowerPoint as you currently know it today. I'm on PowerPoint 2013. Depending on the exact version you're on, your interface may look a little bit different. So you'll see I've still got all my standard PowerPoint toolbars along the top, so nothing has changed there. You will notice that I also have a Turning Point toolbar that's been added. Okay, that is always your sort of visual flag to say, okay, Turning Point's running, I'm good to go. Okay. Now, the process that we're about to look at here as far as building a polling slide, it's exactly the same whether you are adding polling slides to an existing presentation that maybe you've done in the past and now you want to add polling slides to it, or you are building something totally new from scratch. Okay, the steps are exactly the same. The only difference is going to be is that if you want to add it to an existing presentation, once you're sitting at this point, you're just going to go File, Open, and grab that presentation that you want to add questions to. As far as the questions go, when you add a set of questions or slides to a presentation, it does not change the format of your presentation at all. Okay, it's still just a standard PowerPoint file. So that's kind of one of the nice things with TurningPoint is it doesn't become a proprietary thing at all. So let's have a look at how I actually built this multiple choice polling slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my TurningPoint toolbar here. And one of the big things to remember when you're working with TurningPoint, whether you're building questions, saving data that you've collected, or anything like that, you're always going to do those things through the TurningPoint toolbar. So anything at all that's polling related always happens on the TurningPoint toolbar. Okay, very important thing to remember. And I'm going to be referencing that a couple of times. And so what we're going to do to create a new question slide is we're going to start with the new drop down here on the far left end of the TurningPoint toolbar. And this menu contains all the different types of questions you can create. Okay, so depending on the type of keypads that you have, some of the question types may or may not be available to you. Like for example, the short answer, numeric response, and essay slide only works with our web polling technology or our NXT keypads because you have to be able to key in, words and sentences and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a multiple choice question here. And you're going to see that what TurningPoint is actually going to do, once my system decides to kind of go, is it's actually going to build a template directly into my presentation for me. And all I have to do is fill in the blanks. Now you'll notice that TurningPoint automatically picked up my presentation template, my footer image, my background, and stuff like that. So if you have like a branded presentation template that your organization uses, TurningPoint will work with it. Just so that you all know, TurningPoint uses the title text slide layout. Okay, so if you're using a presentation template, and I've seen this happen before, which is why I like to bring it up. If you're using a presentation template that has all kinds of customized backgrounds and stuff, and you find that when you create a polling slide, it defaults to that sort of blank white background like you get with just a default PowerPoint presentation, it could very well be that your presentation template does not have a branded title text slide layout. Okay, that's the most common thing that I see happen. Other than that, as long as the title text slide layout option is branded, TurningPoint will pick it up and use it automatically for you. Okay, so from here, it's just a matter of filling in the blanks. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and use the same question that I pulled just a second ago, just to kind of stick and keep it consistent. Okay, for your answer choices, all you have to do is literally just type them in, hit enter after each one, and TurningPoint is automatically going to label them just like any other list does in Word or Excel or PowerPoint. Okay, so you don't have to number them yourself. Once I click outside of that text box, what's going to happen is my chart is going to update to reflect the number of answer choices I created. And it kind of generates like a thumbnail preview here so that, if you're using a background color or an image or something on this slide, it's going to give you an idea sort of what everything's going to look like put together, right? If you've got, let's say, a purple background on your slide, you probably don't want to have the bar for number 4 be purple as well, right? Because it's going to be hard for the audience to see. Okay, and as far as creating a question, that is all you have to do on a very basic level. So like I said before, if you're asking questions where there is not a correct answer associated to it, it's just one of those, what's your opinion, what do you think, please give us your feedback sort of things, you can stop at this point. This question is ready to run. Okay, now going with what I did on the question I pulled just a second ago, where I put that correct answer in, it's a pretty quick additional step that you're going to go through. What we're going to do is on this preferences panel right here, and this is only going to appear when you are working on a polling slide. This preferences panel lets us make changes to this particular polling slide we're currently looking at. So what we're going to do is in the scoring options section here, we're going to go down to the bottom, and there's these 4 drop downs. There's one for each answer choice. And we're just going to tell TurningPoint that number 2 is correct. The second step to that is placing that correct answer indicator, so the check mark that I had. To do that, you're going to go to your Objects menu, go to Correct Answer Indicator, and you can grab one of these pre-built answer indicators in here, or you can also use your own custom image. It's entirely up to you. I'm just going to place that check mark, and you'll see while we're editing the presentation, it's going to appear right away. When we run the slide, it's going to follow that sequence that we saw just a second ago, and I'm going to do that in just a minute. Let me just check the questions here. Great question. How can you change the colors of the chart? So there are a couple ways you can change your chart colors. You can change your chart colors on an individual slide. So let's just say you had a single slide and you wanted to make the chart colors different than the other slides in your presentation. When you click on the chart object on the slide here, what's going to happen is your Preferences panel gives you access to chart colors. Okay, so we can come in here and change them to whatever we want. One of the tricks that I will point out, because quite often it catches me still, and I do get emails and phone calls about it from time to time, is if you just come in here and start changing these colors, the chart doesn't update right away. What you've got to watch for is right here where it shows chart colors and this drop-down currently says PowerPoint scheme. That's telling TurningPoint to use chart colors from your template. If you wanted to use your defined colors, you have to change this drop-down to defined, and that tells TurningPoint use the chart colors here. Okay, so this is going to let you change your colors for just this one slide that we're looking at. Okay, now let's just say, for example, you spent a couple hours building this fantastic presentation with a bunch of polling slides. Let's say it had 25 polling slides in it. And after you're done everything, you decide, you know what, I don't like those chart colors, I want to change them. You can go through and do it one slide at a time. Really though, let's face it, 25 question slides, that's going to take a bit of time, and it's going to get repetitive and tedious, and it's not a really fun thing to do. So what you can also do is on the TurningPoint toolbar here, there's the Preferences button. And if you come in here, you also have chart color options. The difference is once you change them here, you can hit this Apply All button, and it will update the chart colors on all the charts on all 25 polling slides within that presentation. Okay, so it's a very quick and easy way to make like a mass update change to all those polling slides. And you'll notice here there's a lot of different settings you can change. So if you ever want to change anything once you've built your presentation or as you go, it's really, really easy to come in here and make those changes across the whole presentation without having to update slides sort of one at a time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and poll this just so that we can see that the process is going to be exactly the same. Now, one thing I do want to point out is right now on this webinar, I have TurningPoint set to what's called simulated polling mode. And I'd like to point this out because I've had some clients where they've had our technology for years and years and years. And when I show them this, it completely blows their mind because they turn around and say, well, I always thought I had to have a receiver plugged in and a couple keypads in my hands to test my presentation. And that's not the case at all. You can actually test your presentation without any of the hardware present because TurningPoint does work without your receiver plugged in, right? So we can do all this stuff without a receiver. And so what you can do to put TurningPoint into simulated mode is on the TurningPoint toolbar here, sort of right smack in the middle, there's this polling section. By default, what TurningPoint does is it goes to live polling mode, so it always assumes you have a receiver plugged in and an audience with keypads. If you change this drop-down to simulated polling, what that's going to do is it's just going to tell TurningPoint to fire 30 random responses into each question that you poll. So it's a really, really quick and easy way to run through a presentation and test it to make sure everything's kind of set up exactly the way you want it. One thing I will warn you about is that if you're running in simulated polling mode and something on one of your polling slides is not quite working correctly, you know, let's say your correct answer indicator isn't quite the size that you like, or it's not quite appearing in the right spot, or something like that, don't just chalk it up to, oh, well, I'm in simulated mode, it'll probably work fine in live polling mode. whether you're in simulated or live mode, the presentation will work exactly the same way. Okay, so if something's not working properly in simulated mode, you're going to experience the exact same challenge in live polling mode. Okay, so just a heads up and a tip there. Great question. I don't see simulated polling for the Mac version. That is correct. The Mac version currently does not have a simulated polling option in it. So if you are a Mac user, you will need to have a receiver plugged in and at least one keypad to kind of go through and test stuff. Unfortunately, that is one of the things that's a little bit different on the Mac version right now. There's a couple of little workarounds for that. If you find that it becomes an issue, if you send me a quick email and let me know, what we can do is just set you up with like a basic Responseware account with like a single license, and you can actually test responses from a smartphone. So that's kind of the easy workaround for the Mac version. But yeah, absolutely. If it becomes a challenge and you need a way to easily test stuff without having your receiver, just let me know and I can get you set up. Okay, so I'm just going to run this slide really quick here, just so that you guys can see that it does in fact work the same way as one that we just did. So polling opens. Responses come in. This is going to, again, stop at 30 because I'm in simulated mode. Advance one time to show my results. Advance a second time to display what the correct answer was. Okay, so it really is, you know, that easy and that user-friendly. Okay, so that is building a basic multiple choice polling slide with an optional correct answer indicator assigned to it. Okay. As far as question slides that we're going to build, that is what we'll cover today. What I do also want to talk about is a couple of very important things. Saving the data that you've collected. I want to talk about what it means to reset your session because that's a very important piece of all this. And then we'll have a quick look at some basic reporting types. And then that'll kind of wrap us up for today. So first thing is we'll talk about is saving the data that you've collected. Now, what happens is as you are polling your different questions throughout your presentation, TurningPoint will obviously update your charts, right? Just like we've seen it doing to show what the results were. The other thing that it does is it also keeps a separate file with all the keypad data in it. And we refer to that as your session file or your session data. So anytime you see or hear us reference that, that's all we're talking about. And that session data is what you want if you want to be able to run reports later on. So without that, you don't have the ability to see how each person responded, what the overall responses were for your questions. You can't take data from multiple presentations and merge them together. So that is kind of an important thing if you want to be able to track this information over time. One of the concerns that has come up in the past is, you know, well, I do hundreds and hundreds of sessions a year, you know, how much space is that going to take up? The session file itself is a relatively small file. They're usually between, you know, 100 kilobytes to, you know, 1,000 kilobytes or so. So they're generally under a meg in size. So you don't usually need to worry too much in terms of storage space with them. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to walk through how to save your session data. Now, this is a step that not a lot, but enough people go wrong. And unfortunately, we get phone calls after the fact, and there's not really a whole lot that we can do if you don't save your session data. So going back to what I said a little while ago, anytime you want to do anything related to polling, you always do it through the TurningPoint toolbar. That also goes for saving your polling data or your session data that you've collected. Okay? What a lot of people tend to do is when they're done their presentation, in PowerPoint, they just go File, Save, and save their PowerPoint presentation. Okay? So File Save just saves your PowerPoint file. It doesn't save your TurningPoint session data. And so really, at the end of the day, the only thing we're overly concerned about is that session data. The presentation, we don't need to worry about saving at all because it doesn't actually contain any keypad data. And so what we're going to make sure we do is on the TurningPoint toolbar, click your Save Disk and choose the option to Save Session. Now TurningPoint is going to ask you to give the session a name. And so I always recommend to come up with a naming convention that makes sense for everybody kind of internally that's going to be using TurningPoint and makes it easy so that theoretically anybody could take any session that you've done and know exactly what they're going to get as far as the report goes. So generally what I do is I'll use something about the workshop or the event name. I'll sometimes use the date, and if it's like a speaker or a facilitator that we're working with, I'll use the speaker or facilitator's name in the file name as well, just to make it easy to reference. Now what TurningPoint does by default is it saves your file, your session file or data, on the computer that ran the presentation. Okay, so that's where it's going to go by default. You do have the option to save your session file to a flash drive, to a network location. It doesn't really matter. You can kind of put it anywhere you want. But the key thing to remember is by default it goes to the computer that ran the presentation. Once you've saved it, you're good to go. You can safely kind of shut everything down. Now, what's going to happen is, let's say you forget to save your session file. Let's say at the end of your workshop, a participant comes up and says, hey, great workshop. I had a question about this particular thing you were talking about, and I didn't want to ask during the presentation. I didn't want to interrupt. And you start engaging in that discussion with that person afterwards. You may totally forget to save that session file. If you do forget to save it, and you try to close down your presentation, TurningPoint will pop up a little warning that says, hey, there's unsaved session data here. Do you want to save it, or do you really want to exit? Okay, so it does give you that sort of safety net. At that point, if you say, no, don't save it, I want to exit, you're basically saying, no, I don't want to keep this information, throw it away. And once you do that, TurningPoint will wipe out that session file, clear it from memory, and it's basically kind of gone for good. I shouldn't say gone for good because there's like a 2 or 3% chance that we can recover it through like backup files and stuff, but just like with anything, we don't generally recommend relying on that. If there's any possibility that you might want that information down the road, just make sure to save it. If you end up not using it, it's an easier thing to delete than to try to go through all these hoops to try to recover it afterwards. Okay? So that is the process that you're going to go through in terms of saving your session data at the end of a presentation. Now, what I want to talk about next is a step that we recommend doing at the beginning of your presentation. For any of you that may have run polling sessions before, you are probably familiar with resetting your session. Essentially what that means is that you're telling TurningPoint, start this presentation new as of right now. So if I go ahead and let me just close this down here. Let me just go back into PowerPoint polling, and I'm just going to reopen that presentation. So let's imagine here that presentation I just had open. I ran that today with you guys, and let's just say I actually had you all responding to the questions. What's going to happen is, let's say 6 weeks from now, I want to use the same presentation, but with a different group of participants. Okay? What you're going to notice here is, because I saved my PowerPoint file, my charts still show this old information. Okay? Now, if I actually run this presentation, what you're going to see happen is polling doesn't open, and that old data appears from the last time I used the presentation. So we obviously don't want to have that happening. So as a best practice, we recommend always clicking your Reset drop-down menu here and choosing the option to reset your session. Okay, that's just going to tell TurningPoint, hey, go through, clear out any existing information and start this presentation new. Okay. Otherwise, what can happen is you'll have old data appearing, just like you saw there. You could have the data from this next group compile on top of the previous group, and just a whole pile of things that you really want to avoid. So again, just to kind of recap, you're going to reset your session at the beginning to tell TurningPoint to start new, and then you're going to save your session data at the end, which is what's going to make that particular presentation you just did unique. Okay, so you can use the same PowerPoint file 1,000 times if you wanted to, and by saving your session data each time, that makes each of those groups or presentations unique each time you run it. Okay. So we'll still save correct answers. Yes, so as far as correct answers and things like that go, if you reset your session, it will keep all your proper correct answers. It won't, anything that you've changed as far as chart colors, correct answer indicators, if you've changed any of your font types, if you've resized any of your charts, all those things will still remain 100% intact. It just simply clears out the any existing response data as far as the charts go. Okay. All right. Let's have a peek here and see what is next on our list. Reporting. Okay. So let's have a look at some of the basic reporting options that are available here. Now, in terms of your reporting, you're generally going to do that through your TurningPoint dashboard. Okay, so you don't have to jump all the way into PowerPoint in order to run a simple report on stuff. And so this is actually going to be our first look here at the actual TurningPoint dashboard. We saw that screenshot earlier, and so this is actually the live one on my system right now. And so to run a report, all we've got to do is, you've got 3 tabs here. Reporting is found under your Manage tab, so we're just going to go here. And down the left-hand side here, you're going to start to see all the different sessions that you've conducted and saved on your computer. So going back to earlier when I said, come up with a naming convention, you can see where that's going to become more and more useful the more you use TurningPoint, right? If I just left everything as this default new session with a date and time stamp, if I had 1,000 sessions sitting here, you can imagine how much of a hassle that's going to be to figure out what it is I want to look at, right? And so what TurningPoint does is it automatically sorts your session files based on how that session file was conducted. So I mentioned earlier in the additional topics section next week, we'll look at how to create a participant list. But if you create a participant list and track your individual participants in your session, just like I did here with this instructor course, TurningPoint will automatically group that session with that participant list. So it automatically sorts everything. So again, it makes it a lot easier for you to come in here and find things. By default, what TurningPoint does is it runs in what's called auto mode. And so all that means is TurningPoint just simply reads device IDs. It doesn't know who's who. And so what you'll find is, for the most part, unless you're always tracking people, most of your session data will probably group underneath the auto category. So you'll see this section here start to kind of expand a fair bit. My simulated section here has a lot of stuff in it. Well, not a lot, but a few sessions. And that's primarily because when I do these web training sessions and webinars and stuff, I just simply run in simulated polling mode. And when I save the data to show how the reports work, that's where it groups everything. Okay, and so all we've got to do is just select the session we want to report on, hit our reports button down in the bottom corner, and TurningPoint's going to start giving us some different types of report data. And so what we're looking at here is just a simple results by question report. So what it's going to do is it's going to give me each question that I polled. In brackets, it will tell you what type of question it was. So if this was, say, a priority ranking slide, it'll say priority ranking here instead of multiple choice. It'll give you your answer choices, how the audience responded, and then your chart. Okay, and because these 2 questions I polled had correct answers assigned to them, it will color code incorrect and correct, green and red, and accordingly. Okay. You can look at different types of reports. So let's say, for example, we wanted to look at how each individual participant or each individual keypad has responded to every question. I can come in here and do that as well. Okay, so as I start scrolling through here, because I didn't actually have a participant list loaded, it's very generic information. But if I had created a list with names and stuff like that, I would have actually seen, you know, okay, Derek had device ID 8, and here's how he answered the questions. You know, wow, I'm a terrible student. I actually got 0%, right? So it kind of gives you an idea, the sort of information that you can start to sort of gather. Now, regardless of the type of report you're looking at, they can all be directly printed. So we give you the option here to print it. If you've got something like Adobe Acrobat installed, you can send it to a PDF file. The other big thing you can do is you can also export to CSV, Excel, or HTML. So if you need to manipulate this data in any way, let's say you wanted to create pivot tables or run some formulas of your own or whatever, you know, I'm sure everybody knows, you know, once the data is in an Excel format, you can do just about anything to it, right? So we give you the ability to pull that data out into those different file formats. Okay. And so that's sort of an overview on how the reporting is going to work. Let me just pull back my presentation here. Okay. So that about wraps us up. So we did end up finishing up a few minutes early. So if you guys do have any questions at this point, because the line's muted, I mean, feel free to use the QA or chat functionality there on the side. I'll stick around for a little bit to answer any additional questions that might come through. Again, like I said, feel free to keep my information handy if you don't already have it. Email is generally the easiest way to get a hold of me because I do tend to be out of the office a fair bit, and I am fairly busy with training and webinars and things like that. So generally, email will get a much quicker response. So feel free to reach out to me for any of that. You know, how can we do this? Can TurningPoint do that? Sort of stuff. We do also have technical support available here at the office, so if you ever run into anything major like, you know, my keypad's not working, my receiver isn't detecting, I can't get TurningPoint to install, when you call in, our phone system will give you the prompts to reach through directly to technical support. So they're always there as a resource as well. I do see a couple of questions popping in. Just before I do get to those, just to kind of recap, I will be posting this webinar online on our website along with the slide deck plus that PDF that I referenced earlier with all the information that we've gone over this afternoon, as well as that sort of 10-step checklist. So I will be posting that on our website as soon as the video is done uploading and processing and all that fun stuff, and I'll fire that out into it in an email to everybody that was registered for the webinar today. Okay. Perfect. So with that all being said, I'll stick around for some questions here, and other than that, I'll let you guys kind of get back to your afternoons or mornings, depending on where you're located, and hope to see everybody out for the continuation next week. Thanks a lot, everybody. Okay, so question, can the channel number change, or is it always going to be the same one? So as far as the channel numbers go, they, by default, everything that ships out of our office leaves our building on channel 41. So every person that buys from us or rents from us, everything's out there on that same channel number. And the only way it's going to change is if somebody changes it. And so just to kind of give you an idea here, let's say you wanted to change channels. Let's say you had a couple of receivers and you wanted to split your keypads into two different kits. Or let's say you go off-site to a conference center to do a workshop, and you get there and realize, oh, geez, there's somebody in the room next door using TurningPoint as well. And you go over and say, okay, well, they're on 41. Well, I can't be on channel 41 as well, right? Because that's going to cause a whole lot of problem. And so what you can actually do is if you want to change the receiver channel number, on your TurningPoint toolbar here, there's a little option underneath live polling that shows the receiver. So if I click on that, this drop down right here beside my receiver, I can change this to be anything between 1 and 82. Okay, now we generally recommend leaving 10 channels between kits. So if somebody else is on channel 41 next door, go to 31 or 51 or something like that. Okay, once I change my receiver to channel 30, it's going to stay on channel 30 until it gets changed to something else at a later time. Okay, so once you do it once, you do not have to do it again unless you want to change it to something else. Okay, for the keypads, what's going to happen is, let me just enlarge one of these here. To change your keypad channel number, what you're going to see is in the bottom left corner, you'll see a little channel button. And so what you're going to do is you're going to hit that channel button, punch in the same channel number that matches your receiver. So in my case, I switched to 30, so I would hit channel 30 and then hit channel again, and that's going to change the channel number on the keypad. Unfortunately, you do need to do each keypad one at a time. There isn't like a quick program where you can just kind of zap them all in one shot. So if you've got, say, 100 or 200 keypads, I mean, it may take you 4 or 5 minutes to kind of run through and do it. So it's not a huge deal. It's more of just kind of an inconvenience than anything else. The other thing that I've seen work really well is if you realize last minute, oh, geez, we've got to change all the channels on these keypads, instead of doing it yourself, when your audience shows up, and let's just say you've got a 200-person audience, you can change your receiver before they show up, and then what you can say is before you get started, okay, just before we get going, I just need you guys to change the channel numbers on your keypad really quick and just kind of walk them through doing that. Okay. On our models that have the little LCD display on them, in the top center of the screen, it will show you the channel number that it's on. So once you've changed all of them, or if somebody changes the keypad channel accidentally just by pushing buttons during the session, if somebody says, oh, hey, my keypad's not working, and they're the only one that's having that problem, it's really easy to identify and say, okay, well, remember at the beginning I said you got to change to channel 30, you're still on channel 41, so just, here's the steps again. So it's a really easy thing to troubleshoot. So, same as the receivers, once the keypads have been changed, they will retain that channel setting until they're changed again. Even if let's say you had to replace the batteries, if you pull the batteries out and put new ones in, it will still retain that channel setting that you've set it to. Okay. Okay, so channel 50. So if your receiver is on channel 50, let's say, for example. So if you go receiver and yours says, let me just pull mine up here. If yours says 50, where mine says 30, then that's saying your receiver is on channel 50. And if your keypads are not communicating with the receiver, like if you're trying to, if you hit the test button right here, and you start hitting buttons on your keypads, if they're not talking and they're not showing up here, that's going to tell you that, okay, well, the receiver's on a different channel than the keypads. If you have a keypad model that has the display, if yours is showing 41 or if it says 32 or something like that, then you'll need to change the channel number on the keypad to match that same channel 50 that the receiver's on. Now, if you find that, and I've found this for some, I don't know why, I don't know what people do, but if you find all your keypads are on channel 41 and your receiver is on channel 50 for some reason, obviously in that scenario it's a lot quicker just to change your receiver back to channel 41, right, rather than doing each keypad. Yeah, that's really the only thing that you have to kind of do is make sure that keypads are on the same channel as the receiver, and that's really all that kind of links those two things together so that they can communicate with each other. I hope that answers your question, or at least partially answers it. If not, let me know. Fire me an email or give me a shout afterwards, and we can get into that in a little more detail as well. Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left before I'll jump off the webinar. So if there's any other questions, I see there's still some people hanging around. So if there's any other questions that you guys have, feel free to submit them, and I'll hang out here for a bit longer.